Thank you, Florian, for this very kind introduction, and thank you again for the invitation. Yeah, actually, how I came to science communication and talking to you about plain language has to do a lot with the combination of my interest as a scientist, and then talking about smell, odors in many different ways. And around all this, the center is always the communication and the contact to the public and the audience, which will be, in a way, the topic of my seminar today. So what I want to do with you today is a very quick overview of some of the, meanwhile I'm sharing my screen. And the idea today is to give you just some short elements that will help you, I hope, to dive into this very intricate jungle, which is how to talk about science, our research to everyone, to general public, to people who might want to give the money to fund our research, as well as a general public. And this has all to do with one point, which is related to language in general and technical language. And to do this, I want to recall quickly a quote from George Orwell, who was criticizing a lot technical language and specifically political language because of being too technical and making somehow lies sounding truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. What does it mean? And why Orwell was so angry, somehow upset with this political way of talking? The idea is that always that power and politics are connected to the way we speak, the words we choose, and how we try to transfer some information to general public or people in general. And this is very political, of course, because sometimes the bureaucracies, the technical wording of putting a sentence has a lot to do with the control of what you want people to get or not. This is why language is so important. And at this point, you might argue and ask yourself why what this has to do with science, and why we can relate and connect language and politics. So, well, we are still in a period, in a time which bring us to a lot of political choices and situations which are very much connected to science, as we have seen. And we have learned that actually it's not only about science and what research might say, but it's also how you communicate this to the public or to the politicians, who then they need to bring and take some decisions which are then in turn affecting everyone. And so this is why, again, language and communication are so important. And in this first part of the seminar, we'll try to give you some elements in case you want to dive more or deeper on your own later on, just to put into the context the value and the meaning of the science communication, the scientific knowledge, let's say, is political impact, and what, again, all this has to do with the language. And this has to do with trust. This is another word that we have heard a lot during these last years and months. And we know that, or you might have heard that scientists have some issues at the moment with trust in society. And people don't always trust experts, or sometimes they trust only a certain kind of expert. And the point is that actually we know that science is not something like just to trust, is a process. But this is what we know. What the public know is something different. And how we can connect and rebuild a bridge between the process of science, how it works, what is building pillar, and the society. the implicit argument of this is that, of course, as a science, if you take for granted that science is something trustworthy, then everything should be fine. We know that scientists are very reliable people, very serious people. They do a good research and we can just trust them. And actually, in most of the survey, in general, also some of the surveys who were made also recently in the States shows that actually it is like that. Usually scientists are quite perceived as a trustworthy people. But still, the point is that when a person doesn't assume that science is something that can be trusted, then any kind of argument that we can provide to support a scientific data is completely lost and useless, because then it doesn't make any difference. If I don't trust you, then whatever you say, I will always doubt that you might have a second interest or a conflict of interest, or that what you want to make me do or do has to do with your specific or local interest, for example. So how do we get out from this impasse? And for this, if you want to go deeper on this point, I really recommend you a book from Naomi Oreskes, which was a geologist, and she specialized in climate change and environment, who wrote, last book was Why Trust Science? And she's now a science writer, a science communicator, and she works a lot exactly on this point. She has studied and investigating a lot all this fragile equilibrium between science, society, and the communication, and goes in a way on the core of our seminar here, because as we will see in a moment, this has to do actually with language as well. So I need now you to make a step forward into the concept of science communication first. Science communication actually is a very big umbrella, which include different kind of communication, because as a scientist, we are always communicating. And science communication is also what we are doing now, what you will do in the next days, what you do with your colleagues during a lab meeting, during a conference, when you are writing a technical paper. Every time we are doing communication with our colleagues. We do communication when we are writing a project. We are submitting for funding. And we might need to do science communication when we need to communicate the results of our papers as a press release, for example, or as an interview, because a journalist or a radio decide to interview us to ask more and to know more about our research or our perspective on a specific topic. So science communication is a very big environment, which is usually perceived as a bridge between the science and the society. And the science communicator most of the time is the person who specializes in translating science in a language, in a plain language, for the society and for everyone. As I just mentioned, actually, science communication could be considered as something more something larger, let's say, because we communicate between scientists as well. But as I said, let's go more to the science communication for general audience. This bridge has some difficulties sometimes to be built. And this has to do with the fact that we consider many times general people, as an empty vase that needs to be fulfilled with our knowledge. So the idea of translating and making this bridge between the science and the general public goes and uses as a underline the idea, the classical concept that people need to be educated. The deficit information model is a very classical paradigm for science communication, which has been investigated for quite long now. And we know that actually what usually we do as a scientist also normally is just that, okay, we trust our data, our fact, and as soon as we can explain them and show them to other people, they will understand and get our point. The point is that it doesn't work this way. And usually it's not like our perspective would be like, okay, then they are not educated, they are ignorant, they might be not good enough on getting or understanding this complex concept. And so the solution would be, in this kind of setting, the pouring in the head of the person a certain knowledge, an explanation, showing the fact one after the other one, and show that, see, looks like this. Actually, a lot of studies has shown that when you show just the data to a person who doesn't agree with that statement, it will just be and reinforce his own convention and idea, original idea. Actually, then this results to be, in a way, counterproductive. Why this happens? What is the issue and why this model is a problem? Why it doesn't work? The point is that the science communication needs a language that is understandable by the audience and the target of our communication. And this, as I said at the beginning, is something that regards everyone, not only the public as a general target, but also other scientists. We communicate all the time, and sometimes we need to communicate between scientists among disciplines which are not exactly the same, or field or subfield of specializations which are not exactly the same. So in a way, if you just step out a moment from this first frame of the idea that I can just provide data to my audience in order to be understood, we will see that there are a lot of shades around this. So we can consider science communication and plain language as the ability to discuss the science in the terms that the audience will understand. But we need also another piece to complete this puzzle. And why? Think a moment. The point is that actually the flow of information between us and the society is a flow that goes both ways. This bridge is something that connects science and society, but allows the communication from science to public and back. So if we consider this only as a vertical kind of connection, and again, as a pouring something from our full of knowledge jar into the empty head of people, doesn't work, because society is more and more, and now more than ever, involved in political decisions, social decision, and we are part of it, actually. We live in it. We are not something outside. So this is why everything is so complex, and the communication needs some retargeting in a way, because it's not just the science, I said, the scientists speak and the other just listen, get the information, and then they act according to that. But is everything more complex? And actually, this is why also it becomes, or might be sometimes, political, because politics needs to take into account for some decision, not only the scientific knowledge, but also how this will be translated and how the consequences of some application will be implemented in the society. What will be the economical consequences, the other political and social economical consequences. All this is much more complex. And this is why when we are making communication, we need to take this into account, because everyone read and understand the information that we will provide in a specific context and frame, which is defined in particular by their own experience, their own social context, and their need. So the attention and how they will perceive that information will be affected by their specific experience and context, for example. And then we have other practical reasons why it's good and it's useful to put our science in terms that are more understandable, and why it's important to take into account the perspective of our audience. Some are very practical because, of course, as a scientist, we are not all specialized in communication, although we are often required to have some communication skills. But when we are writing a project, for example, we need to ask for money. So it means that who will read our project, our paper, will need also to understand some basic point in order to justify the funding. Why I should give you my money? Why we should use public money to pay your research? Why this topic might be important for this institution, for our society, why the seek for knowledge is also important. And sometimes even when we go to basic research, we have these issues very, very often. So being able to translate in a way our technical science, our technical and specific aim in something that the reader and the audience will understand is very important, even for the sake of the science, actually. This is one point. And then we have another aspect, which is also important and needs to be not underestimated. It's because there are some other reasons and issues which are not so immediately visible and not apparently practical. These are some, let's say, social, transversal, and ethical issues. Imagine, for example, that you are applying for a research which involves patients, or it can be also just a survey or a clinical trial or something who implies somehow the participation of volunteers, humans. So how do you communicate your research, the goal of your project to these people, and why it is important to communicate to them? So first, they are contributing actually to your research because they are participating as a volunteer. In some cases, like in some clinical trials, they are even sometimes patients as well. So in this case, the ethical issues is even more delicate because we are also treating the patient. So is right to understand what is going on, what might be expected, why is important. They are again contributing to our research. And this goes again both ways, because if you step out from the idea that you are just a scientist outside all the rest of the society, you will realize that in any moment you might become a volunteer, a patient, or a part of the society which is also receiving somehow the outcome of this research. This is why everything goes somehow circular, and this is why it's so important to curate these aspects as well. Being able to communicate properly and translate our science in a more plain language, understandable language, has to do a lot, as I mentioned earlier, with trust. We don't trust, of course, what we don't understand, what sounds too technical, sometimes sounds also for human brain a bit more suspicious. Probably even better than me that human brain is very superstitious in a way. We like simple things. We don't like complexity. We don't like to make choices based on statistics and numbers. Brain goes very, very quickly on what emotionally seems to be better fitting to our frame, our context, what makes us feeling good, feel more safe, secure. And usually what is confirming our previous knowledge or what is more reassuring is also considered more trustfully. So again, if we don't understand completely what the information that we are receiving, we are more suspicious. And this is partially how we build or break the trust between institutions, between scientists, and the rest of society. And also just the human aspect of just we are people, we are humans, we like also communication and we like to understand each other. We want just to have a fair relationship between people and persons. All this goes also on, again, another practical aspect, because as I said, science communication implies also popular science or the communication that we have to write or tell in a press release. And this, again, has also a practical good aspect when we see that actually our citation index increases when we are able to better communicate our science, because the more the research goes on newspaper or other media, actually even other scientists will be more prone to cite and know your research. So this is again a loop who opens also another tricky aspect, which is not the topic for now, but would be very interesting also to address, which is also the conflict of interest that sometimes we have when we are promoting or even a little bit our research, sometimes also with good faith, because again, we are not trained always as a communicators, but sometimes this can fire by counter fire, because again, where is the balance between promoting, let us know that our research is worth the funding and the attention of the public, because maybe we are working in a very niche field, and what is the overselling big title that sometimes we try to use just to take this attention. So I give you these elements just as an input for yourself to consider if you want to read more about this, and just to be a bit more aware of all these big ecosystems that actually are behind just the science communication, the need of writing in a more understandable way, and the value also of plain language. Now, what is plain language in particular, and why we need even to communicate with our colleagues sometimes? Plain language is usually considered like the communication that is as a structure, a design, and a series of words which are clear. And again, the audience, our public, are able to understand in a way that they will find what they need, they will understand the finding, and they will be able to use this information. This is a key aspect again, because we are always in all our presentations, even with colleagues, very, very much focused on our own, what is for us important, because of course we are doing the research, so that topic is very important to us, and we believe of the relevance of the data. But this might be not the perspective of the audience. So the idea, and what I suggest, what I invite you to do, is try to flip this perspective and put yourself in the shoes of the audience. Try to think what is their experience, what they need, what is attracting their attention, why this information might be relevant for them, what they will do with this information. And in this way, it would be also easier to design and find a language that is more appropriate to reach them, to make this information understandable and useful to them. The concept of popularizing actually is very much connected to this. talking about science communication for general public, we use always the term popular science. And popularization comes from, is the translation from the Latin divulgare, who means spreading, to spread, disseminate. So taking something and give to the people around, to normal people. This means that it's a very nice idea, a democratic idea of spreading like a seed concept and knowledge so that everyone can benefit from it. But what are we exactly doing if we make popular science or science communication when we are writing about our paper or our research? What actually is useful for our audience to have? Is a specific data only? It turns out that actually most of the case, what is the aim and the action that is very useful and makes the difference in the science communicator and what the science communicator does is giving a set of tools, not just data. What we do is to provide instruments, a method, a context to understand and put that specific data and information in a specific context, or in the context that is much bigger than the niche detail of that specific paper of research, for example. This is why it's important usually not just to talk to the expert, not just to interview the expert who says or tell his own opinion. This actually is one of the tricks to distinguish who is a trustworthy expert and who he doesn't. Because if you are interviewed and they ask you about coronavirus or about how brains work, how proprioceptions work, you won't tell your personal opinion, but you will explain and put what you know from your research into the context of the literature and the scientific community consensus. We give the audience the instrument and the context to understand what science knows till now, what our colleagues are also doing, exactly how we do in the introduction of a paper, when usually we do and report what has been done till this point. And also if there are some conflictual data, or some people or some data that are reported in different way, or some data that has been not yet replicated. So this is the big context who helps people to understand how to take and where to put your piece of information. This is, in a way, the first rule or tip to keep in mind when we are communicating. And in this case, means to give a proper context, the method to understand not just a single data. This, of course, can also go along with the general context. But the idea is that for a person might be more useful to understand what he will do with this information. What does it mean in terms of other studies? Because many people cannot just know all the technicalities, of course, and even myself, I cannot dive much in a technical paper of physics or astronomy. We need always all to rely a little bit to the knowledge of other scientists, other colleagues. So how can we have a bit of sense of what is this information, how far goes the relevance of this research, for example? Another big issue that we have, and sometimes refrain us to go for a plain language explanation of our research, has to do with the process of this translation into simple words. Why this happen? So translation actually is and means in a way that we are recreating and we are transforming, we are somehow changing something into a different form, because translation doesn't mean just to put words into another language, but the words change because languages are different and they are also mirroring the society in which this language evolved and disseminated. And so this is the point. Many scientists always say things about, yeah, well, actually, if I have to translate my science and make it simple, then they will lose all the deeper meaning, the point, because it's so complex. I cannot make it simple. Or as someone said, okay, the translation then can be faithful or beautiful, and this is what we struggle many times. Sometimes we have to make a kind of translation, but then the sentences are boring, are not nice, or they sound or read technical. So how to make something that is still a good text, a good communication, even engaging, but on the same time be precise and keep the key part of the information. So for this, of course, this is why there are specialized communicators for this, but we can all work a little bit on this point. And the idea is exactly that translation is not, again, just pouring something on an empty flask or from one to another one, exactly with the deficit model of information. We think that it's just necessary to pour information into the head of people who don't have or don't understand yet that information. It's about the context and the interpretation of this information. And in translation, this means that we need to give a kind of interpretation, making choices, how you put this text, this information into a bigger context, which part you keep and which you leave. And this, again, needs to be calibrated also with your audience, what they need, what they want to know, why this might be relevant for them. This has to do also with some emotional reaction, ours and the reaction of our audience, again, because we might not have the same need and perspective, because, of course, the relevance of our research for us might be very different from what a general public might perceive. This is why it gets also tricky. And this is why we refuse many times to abandon and leave out our technical jargon, which again makes everything at the end much more difficult. Easy for us because is our internal slang somehow, but makes very, very difficult and feeling uncomfortable sometimes the general public. Again, keep in mind this relation of power and the political, democratic aspect of being able to translate, put in simple words our knowledge in a way that another person can understand, can get it. To do this, we need to keep in mind also that the information is not just about what we are telling them, but the frame that they will use and what they will do with this information. So it's not just, okay, I'm telling this that, trust me, is very useful. You will see. But because it's not how does it work? And this we experiment on our own every time. If someone tells us, no, but trust me, it's like that. The first reaction is always just, okay, I'm not sure actually. And so it works in this way. We need to understand and know what they will do with this information, why they need it, what are also the emotional need. Maybe they are just scared, they are confused, they had a bad experience with drugs and physicians, so they are not so keen to trust again science or taking drugs or taking medicaments, or it can be any kind of reason that we might not know, but we need to acknowledge that this doesn't mean that the person is ignorant or they just don't get information. They don't get the information the way we are communicating it. So this is an example going more on the technical aspect of how, and I will try to give you just few practical examples of how to make it like just technical sentences in a more plain language, and then you can just make some practical exercise on your own and play with this. So this is a cloud, word cloud that I created looking at some abstracts and papers. This come from my field of specialization, which is olfaction. And while I was making and working with some scientists, letting them try to make some like more general plain language summaries of their research, they came up and pop up a lot of technical words, which you might also find in your own paper sometimes, like confidence interval, linear regression, epidemiology, prevalence, and sinonasal and pathogenesis and whatever. All this big cloud of words are somehow synthesizing how we usually communicate our science. And even terms that might appear to us so simple and easy actually might not be for a person outside academia or science. And so the point is, how would you translate these words? How you can find correspondence in a plain language which can still retain somehow the meaning of these words, but in a way that is more approachable. One thing is first to draw a proper context to get this information. And this has to do again with another topic which would need a separate entire workshop, which is about the storytelling and how we build the stories. Again, many scientists are very, very not comfortable with the idea of making this plain language translation or build a storytelling about our stories. But if you think about and you read the structure of our papers, we are all the time telling the story because we realized we had an hypothesis, we realized what has been done, then we do other research, and during this research we find something, and then we get some conclusion. So this is already a story. The point is how to make it more understandable for our public. And in some exercise, usually when I ask scientists to try to make a general summary for that would be ideally be read by general public, they start to make a structure that usually reads like this. We have like the background, the bottom line, as we do in the paper, then how the study was done, so which correspond more or less of the method and the methodology that was used, and then what were the results, and then usually the discussion and the conclusion. So why this structure doesn't really work for a person who's reading about this research for the first time, unless he's also a technical person. And even in that case, sometimes a good, well-made summary would be more beneficial. What is not working here? The point is that you have to think again, what is the first thing that people or a person, even a patient, if you are communicating about a project or a clinical trial, might want to know first about your research. And this is what you find it, not how you did it. In many cases, we, of course, from our scientist perspective, are very much keen to know all the details about the analysis, the techniques, the methods, how it was done, when, all these things, because of course we need to know this to put in our context to understand and maybe to try to replicate or to know more about that aspect of the project. This is, and again, in that case, we are that specific audience. But if the audience is a more general, broad public, what they want to know first is not exactly how you made this measurement, but what was found, why this is relevant at all. So the suggestion is always to put the things starting from the very general context. Again, the aim, why was done and why what we find, and after, only at the end, give more details that might still be interesting for people to know, but only after, because first you need to get the attention and the trust of them, why they should be interested in what you did. So first you give the general context and the relevant findings. And then you can go more into the detail, bringing them like in a journey through this, the story that was your research. So this would be a more possible way to put the sequence of information, for example, giving first the context and the purpose, and then explain what was found, why it is relevant, which, by the way, again, is always something that is important and key and useful to put quite on the top also, for example, in application for finding, because in that case also you have audience which is in many cases not so specialized in your specific field. So they can have, of course, a very good general understanding of your topic, but still they don't have time, they are distracted, they are doing many other things. They might be not very specialized in your specific field and techniques that you are using, for example. So the key point for them is also, tell me why I should give you the money. And then after that, then you can go really to more details, which in some cases can be also more interesting, can be also animate and enrich the story of how you did and why and what you find it. So a practical short example so that we go then slowly to the end of this crash compact seminar on plain language and communication. And in this case, again, I take a paper that comes from the field of olfaction, but is very, let's say, into our hot topic in this time related to COVID. And as you know, one of the symptoms of the disease is the olfactory decrease and olfactory loss. So to some participants to a workshop, I gave them this paper, and they needed to make a plain language summary of the finding in this paper. In this case, I will take just one line to show you and see how we can work on it. Let's take, for example, a sentence. This was already done in what was pretending to be an attempt of plain language into this summary. And the sentence read like CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, enters and infects the cells in our bodies through the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 protein on cells. And in this case, of course, it's okay, relatively plain already. But what we can observe is that for a general reader or a reader who is already, as you know, brain, again, like to have sentences and words very easy to understand. And when we are reading a text, for example, we don't read usually the full sentence. We jump with our eyes looking and seeking for keywords and the key elements that gives already the context and the general meaning. So in this case, putting first the virus that caused COVID at the beginning instead of just an acronym would already make it easier to understand. And then the other thing is that we are still using a very technical jargon like the angiotensin converting enzyme 2, which is not necessarily something that people knows. They know that the infection happen through this this thing, which might be something that I cannot really visualize and consider. So a very small refinement of this version could be, for example, something like this. The virus that caused COVID-19, CoV-2, enters and infects the cells in our bodies through a structure on the cell surface. So instead of giving just the technical name of that thing, let's say, we give an image that is concrete and easy to visualize a structure on the cell surface is already enough, which is called angiotensin converting. And we are still giving the technical name. So we can still be precise and on the point, but be just a little bit easier to understand. And then we break the sentence and we say, this is a protein that blah, blah. Of course, this can always be rescaled, upgrade and downgrade, depending again what is the audience, because you cannot expect to write something that will always work with everyone and any type of audience. So this is another thing to keep in mind. The idea, and this is why it gets so difficult on speeches, but even more, of course, in written language, is to use a language that is still precise, but sounds natural and easy to follow. This is the challenge and the goal. And here again, just few practical example of how, if you read them, even if you know the meaning and the sentence, reading in a is like, let's say, plain language correspondent will sound even to you probably easier to grasp. All the oplasty, all the ending in ostomy, ectomy, all the sentences. For example, rhinoplasty, an operation to change the shape of the nose. Sometimes it's so easy to make people more adjusted to what we are saying. Tracheostomy. In this case, for example, you can already say an operation to open the trachea. But remember that even trachea might be not known by everyone. I'm making some extreme examples, but it can still be. So you can also try to find a way to, or synonymous, easier to show or explain what trachea is, and then see what with tracheostomy you do. Hysterectomy, a medical operation to remove part of all woman's womb or uterus. And you can, I invite you also to play a bit with the dictionary or medical dictionary or neuroscience manual, and try to play with this kind of jargon, technical wording, and see how this change, how you can retain the meaning and the precision, but make it appear more understandable and clear. And you will see that in many cases, even for relatively specialized written text, like, as I said, as I mentioned, projects and application, this might turn to be a very useful strategy to do writing and communication. Here again, other few examples that you can say instead of using ab, ad, icto, ixo, indo, you can say just away from, toward, outside, inside. So the vocabulary is usually full of possibilities to use other terms that are more understandable and make your sentences clear and even more effective sometimes, because the way we, as I said, we read and we put the information we get depends a lot on the clarity we perceive this information. Just to finish, remember that communication is not just about pouring data, transfer content and information, but is about the experience that the reader of the audience who will get this information will have. And this experience has to do again with the context that you create and you provide, how they will get this information, why they will get emotionally involved in this information. Like, I'm a scientist, I'm a student, I'm struggling because I don't know how to write a clear paper. And this is important to me because if I make it clear, the data will be more understandable. Therefore, I need to understand better how to use a plain language. So in this case, we are involved emotionally in understanding, for example, why plain language is important. For another audience can be something else. You have to find somehow what is their need again. So the summary of this is that remember what your audience will do with that information, in which context and how they will get and receive that information, why it is relevant to them, why they should care about that content, how does it make them feel. And according with this context and these premises, will be easier to focalize and find a way to use a more understandable language. It will motivate you also more to understand and fight on for having a language that is more understandable instead of just acronym and technicism. And with this, I will give you, and this is just again a short recap that you will get in the slide at the end, and you will get also some references if you want to have extra reading or dive a bit more deeper into all this topic, because I understand that there's a lot of information and a lot of material. So, but this was just to rise and give some point to put your attention and awareness on the context of the general communication, the value of plain language, why it's important, why these help us actually to build trust with people who are maybe outside academia and science, and how this can be beneficial for everyone and us as a scientist as well. So for this, I would just say that I would conclude. And there are here also my references in case you want to write to me or ask further questions also in another moment. Otherwise, if you have a few questions or curiosity or doubts, comment, I'm very happy to answer to you. And thank you for your attention.
So